welcome to the Public Voice Salon. We are an open dialogue on education, the arts, and social change. And I am so excited today because this is one of my dreams, is actually to have had this Keen Berger, one of my great heroes, and she has really educated me so much over the years. She is a leading developmental psychologist, a professor at Bronx Community College, an activist in Greenwich Village. She is the female district leader here. She's very active in the Village Independent Democrats, which is a club I've gotten involved with, also with Judson Church. She's a fixture in the community. She's a great scholar and intellect. And her dad was Harold Stassen, who was the great American statesman. He was considered one of the top 5 statesmen of the 20th century. He co-wrote the UN Charter, and he also ran for president 13 times, more than anybody, as a liberal Republican when there was such a thing as liberal Republicans. So Keen has all this amazing background of knowledge of politics, of psychology, and she kind of puts them together. She's a wonderful person. We love her, and we're just so excited. Her doggie is here with us, her new doggie, Shayna. And so I'm going to hand the microphone over to Keen. Welcome to the Public Voice Salon. Maybe we could start with a little bit of how you bring together these two aspects of your life, this interest in psychology and interest in politics. How do they play out in your work and your activism?
Oh, sure. First of all, I should also say that I am very proud of all my family and my father, and also very proud of all the things that John has just said, as well as proud of John. So thank you very much for that lovely introduction. So the question was how politics and psychology, I bring together those two aspects. It seems to me just one aspect. They blend together very clearly in my mind. My political passion is to make everybody healthier and happier and loving each other better, more compassionate. And there are many different ways to do that, but certainly psychology is one. So I study psychology, lifespan developmental psychology, and I teach psychology. And to me, that helps achieve what is my political goal. And I did want to say that that was my father's goal too. That was my brother's goal. That is my daughter's goal. I mean, we are all on the same beam politically, and we all try to accomplish that in our different ways. So I don't see those as two separate things. My tack to my strategy to meet that goal is through psychology. Does that help?
Yes. Well, I just want to hold up two images here. Well, first the book. This is your book, The Developing Person Through Childhood and Adolescence. This is one of the major psychology textbooks, one of the best-selling in the world, used by more colleges than I think any other text in the field of developmental psychology. And this idea of developmental psychology, Keen, is that people can continue to grow across a lifetime. I find that very, very interesting, and I think even our politics, in some way, if we see it as evolving and growing. Now, let me show this photograph here of your dad's side of the family, if we could close up on that. And I'm trying to now think about your own memories of growing up in Minnesota, in the Midwest, with a father who was very active in the community, active in politics. He was the youngest governor of Minnesota, and very active in the Republican Party. He actually helped Eisenhower become president in 1952 when he stepped aside and gave Eisenhower all his delegates. Growing up with all that around you, and do you think that may have somehow influenced your interest in community and psychology?
I think that's probably true. Yeah. Minnesota was a special place, probably is still a special place to grow up, because there is a strong community belief. Farmers helped each other. There are a lot of Scandinavians. It's many things from Minnesota, and just politically, Mondale and Humphrey were from Minnesota, and Hubert Humphrey, good Democrats, but they're still in that same vein. So there's something about being in Minnesota, and then my particular experience. My mother's family were immigrants. My grandmother had 12 children. My father's family also were very active in their community. My father's father was the mayor of West St. Paul. It was in the family tradition that of course you care about the other people. So I do think my growing up there, but also one of the things that happened to me, when I was born, my father was governor. And then this whole political career of his meant that we moved to Philadelphia when I was 6. We moved to Washington, D.C. when I was 11. We moved back to Philadelphia when I was 15. So for me, meeting different people and trying to understand them and being able to care about people from different parts of the country, and that also ended up with people of different ethnic backgrounds, helped a lot. And that was a Minnesota value that personally kept going. When you mentioned my father being the delegate to the United Nations, Roosevelt appointed him because he was a leading Republican, and they wanted an international Republican at that delegation, for the U.S. delegation. His chief of staff, his main delegate, was Ralph Bunche, who was an African-American, brilliant young man at that point. And my father tells a story that he asked the State Department to send him somebody really good who would help him. And they said, we have somebody, but he's black. Is that okay? And my father said, of course that's okay. So Ralph Bunche stayed at our house. This is back in the late 40s. So the idea of racial justice was just part of what I learned from him and my brother. We were all at the March on Washington, Glenn and my brother and my father and I. It was just, of course, this is what you do. So I don't really take credit for my political passions. They just come very important to me and very naturally.
But not everybody who has your background, unique background, I would say, as the daughter of Harold Stassen, who is, let's face it, an icon in American politics. He really is. And I give him credit for his persistence. The fact that he ran 13 times more than anybody. That's in the Guinness Book of World Records. He ran more than anybody for president. He was referred to in a Simpsons episode. They said they referred to the eggs as a la Stassen, always running. That to me is a great quality of you don't give up, you're persistent, you hang in there. He lived to be 93 years old, But you took all that in, and then you went on, and with this Minnesota upbringing, Claudia and I got to see Garrison Keillor last couple weeks ago down in Ocean Grove at the Great Auditorium. We got to see a little piece of his act down there, and he that kind of homespun sense of community kind of thing, and this idea also that you need a community to develop your voice. I think that's important. When you mentioned Hubert Humphrey, I just learned that Hubert Humphrey's dad owned a pharmacy that was like the center, the hub of the town, that people would go there and have meetings and debates and discussions. And Claudia and I live in Hoboken, New Jersey, but we come into the Village, and places like Judson Church, places like the Village Independent Democrats, they're like kind of redoubts of this kind of energy, this kind of open space where you can really be yourself. And to me, you represent that. You educate me whenever you speak at the Village Democrats, and you get up and you're so balanced and interesting and engaging in a way. Trump is running away now with all this attention, and he's very theatrical. You are more interesting than Donald Trump, but you're saying things that are really sound policies at the same time.
Well, thank you very much, but I don't know how to comment on that. But it's true. I mean, it comes very naturally. I mean, that is also, as you know, is also as a professor. I mean, that's how you teach. You have things you want to explain, and you have to get them across, and communicating them is very important. And also, you're right. My household was filled with people talking about all kinds of stuff. And, I should mention that I had one brother, just one brother, one sib. Glenn is also famous in his own way.
This is Glenn's book. Let me just hold up.
Okay, yeah.
The Kingdom Ethics.
Right. Glenn was a professor of Christian ethics at Fuller Theological Seminary in California, so he was far from me geographically, but we talked to each other often, and we would talk about current politics. He would be very happy with the Iran deal, for instance. He traveled to Israel many times and also to Africa. His book, this Kingdom Ethics, translated into many languages. So we were very much in the same stripe, even though he's a theologian. That was not a barrier. I'm sorry about the phone.
That's okay. Well, as we're talking now, Keen keeps putting her hand down because the doggy's here, so she's petting the dog to keep, which is also very Keen, because Keen is always wondering and caring about what's happening around her as a nurturing person. She's always tending to what needs to be done. That's even a maternal instinct also as well, because you're a person who cares about family, who cares about growth and development. Your latest interest is in the phone is, she's so popular. Everybody, this is the spot. This is where people want to be, and to be nurtured by Keen. Your work, your interest has turned to grandmothers now, and maybe you could talk a little bit about grandmothers, because Claudia and I visited my lovely 94-year-old grandmother yesterday in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and I feel like even as my grandmother gets older, she becomes more important to me, and the family stories that she communicates and her vivacity. I mean, it's a wonderful relationship that I have with my grandmother that's become more dear to me. Talk about your own experiences with being a grandmother and being grandmothered, perhaps. Yeah.
Right. Yes, well, of course, grandmothered. I'm both my mother's mother and my father's mother, very important to me. My mother's mother lived with us when I was little, so I knew her well, and that, the important connection. But I now have 3 grandsons. So that made me think, especially as a developmental psychologist, what is this connection? What is the grandmother's role? And there are interesting changes that have happened in the last 50 years since my grandmothers were being grandmothers. The biggest one is just, of course, the demographic change, that there are far fewer grandchildren because there's far fewer babies being born. And since people are living longer, there are far more grandmothers than there used to be in the world and in this country. In this country, the average, if you just calculate it all out, most grandmothers, there's many little kids as there are grandmothers. Whereas it used to be, grandmothers had lots of grandchildren. Not so much anymore. And I've also spoken to many women who have no grandchildren, partly because they had maybe 1 or 2 children, as many women did, and their 1 or 2 children say, well, I'm not going to do that, or I'm waiting. And meanwhile, their mothers are waiting to be grandmothers, not happening. So it's a demographic change of what a grandmother is. And the other big change, my generation of women, we were educated. We're going to college. We had professions. We worked, of course, when we had children. Big change from 50 years ago. So now that we're grandmothers, we're not going to stay home wearing aprons, and just, sitting around. I mean, we're used to being an active part of our families, an active part of our world, and that's a very different grandmother role. So I say that we have a birth dearth and a grandmother glut, just to sort of focus on the fact that there are a lot more older women and there are a lot fewer children. But it's changed what a grandmother is, so I'm writing about that.
Wow. Just want to show another book here. I want to hold it up. This is by your dad, written by your dad, about Eisenhower. This is a book about Eisenhower, who your dad helped to get elected when he gave Ike all his delegates in 1952. I ran for president in 2008, and in 2012 I declared my candidacy both of those years, mostly symbolically, as an educative experience. And also I talk a lot of politics in my classes, and my students one time you should run for president, you should run for president. So I did that. But I felt kind of foolish about it, but then I met you, and then just knowing that who your dad was, I said, well, I know the daughter of Harold Stassen. I could run for president. Right. Did you ever see yourself in a role of maybe getting involved in running, like, for higher office? You are the female district leader of Greenwich Village. Right. Going back into your youth, did you ever have any fantasies about running, like, higher office because of your dad, or?
I certainly thought about it. You could not think about it. I also was the chair of the Community School Board too, and my husband Martin was the mayor of Saltaire. I mean, being in politics was something that we could do. But when I think about it, I think that my gifts are teaching and writing. And politics is a different gift, and I do my part as district leader, and I support, our congressperson and one of our senators, Kirsten Gillibrand, not the other, and Deborah Glick and Brad Holman. I support political people, but I do not personally think that is what I should be doing. I think I should be writing books and teaching students and raising my wonderful daughters. So it was a choice. My political, I believe everybody should be involved politically, but not everybody should be a candidate. But it's interesting to hear that you ran for president. I mean, one of the things my father said, my brother and I told him, Dad, you have no chance. And that was a clap that made the dog come. Yes, well, they were not calling you. And he said, but as a candidate, you get to get your ideas out, and I want to get my ideas out. And it was hard to argue with that, because he did have some good ideas that he wanted publicity for. And especially in his role as Harold Stassen, people wrote down what he was thinking. And so he continued to run.
Well, based on that, I might just consider running again, if Claudia says it's okay. But thinking about this idea of finding your public voice, because our show is called the Public Voice Salon. Judson Church has been a place that's been instrumental in helping me to find my public voice. The fact that there's a microphone that's open to the congregation, that there's, people can get up and say a few things, celebrations and concerns and announcements. It took me like 2 years before I got up the nerve even to say anything up there. A couple weeks ago, I got up to the microphone and I spoke very briefly about a lecture tour that I'm emerging on, a new lecture tour where I'm talking about media and education and how they seem to be dumbing us down. But the fact that I would even have the nerve, the courage to get up there and do that, it took me a long time to develop that. But watching you over the years has given me nurturance, and seeing how you do it, seeing how you are able to keep your humanity and also talk serious stuff, but as a real person in some way. You have such a knack and a gift for that. So if you could maybe share with our public some people who are shy or, have things to say, but they want to develop. You're a developmental psychologist. How can people learn how to not be afraid to stand up in front of other people and say, this is who I am, this is what I think, and this is what I feel?
Good question. What helps me personally, I also consider myself a shy person. It's hard for me to say. I have that voice in me that says, "What do you think you're doing?" But it's it's used. There are things I do believe that we are each gifted in some way. We each have things that we understand, and that if we all contribute what we understand, it'll help all of us. So we shouldn't just not talk. We shouldn't just keep our thoughts to ourselves. So that helps. And also, I do feel that I'm a conduit. That I'm, it's a channel. Through me, some ideas get said. And actually, in psychology, it is true that when a lot of different people all share their ideas, that the chances of ending up with some good ideas is higher. Even if some of the ideas are not so good, but they help the process. So that's certainly true in families. Families, I think, function much better if everybody knows what everybody else is thinking. And that doesn't mean they follow what any particular person is, but that's how I think that helps. So the thing that gives me courage sometimes is to understand this is not just my own personal stuff. This is my contribution to the community. And then I better, not put my light under a bushel in good Christian terms. Yes. I better not hide. It is too selfish to just always be quiet.
Oh, my God. Beautifully put. I want to show two other images here. I want to show family images. First, let's just show here. This is you and your husband, Martin Berger, who was a famous civil rights attorney. Let's show that up there, who championed the right of free speech.
Right.
Major figure. You and him were also very active in the civil rights movement, as you said. All right, let's go back here now to the plains of Minnesota growing up, and this is the family on your mom's side. We could take a look at that. Okay.
Yes.
On your mom.
My mother and her 8 sisters and 3 brothers, and 2 parents, obviously. But that's the whole idea of many people sharing one household. How did they do it? So I learned a lot from that example. And that is the grandmother who lived with me when I was little. So I'm sure, as did 2 of my aunts, my maiden aunts. So there was, our household already had family in it, even when I was a baby. So, yes.
And then going forward, this is a family photo of the Berger Stassens going forward.
Right. Well, that's actually me and my 4 daughters. And then one of them, the only boy there, is my son-in-law. So that's my next generation. And that's, again, family stuff is very important to me. I do believe that we learn a lot from human interaction and families. I think that really helps me in politics because I know that I'm not always right, which is a lot. Some politicians don't seem to know that. I know how you have dialogue, how you compromise, how you figure out what's going to happen next. And all my daughters are great at that. We enjoy figuring it all out. And it doesn't always come out the way anybody wants, but it's part of the process. And the process, of course, itself is fun.
But what would your message to families be that are having a difficult time in having conversations about, let's say, politics, with the polarization in America between the left and the right? Sometimes, is it possible that maybe politics is just too difficult to talk about, depending on the situation and the family, or it seems to be there's so much argument going on in our society. And if you watch the news, if you watch Fox News, and there's such a polarization and Trump is interesting to a point, but seems to be very pushy about it. He's always right. He's this business model mentality that you got to be right all the time, and we're missing the nuance and the shades of gray. Can we bring a psychoanalytic perspective to bear on this, and how can families and people in general have better conversations? Before I came here today, I was over at the Grounded Cafe, and somehow got into a conversation with a group of strangers. And then all of a sudden it went really bad because two of the people disagreed about the Iran treaty, and the one guy got up and stormed and left the table. So, can we learn to grow and use our political voices? And sometimes is silence necessary?
Right. Good questions again. It starts by people need to realize that other people don't have the same goals and values, and we somehow assume they should. And so when they disagree with us, we think people tend to think they're stupid, because if they knew what they were saying, they wouldn't say it, and that's not true. And I guess now I get to talk about grandmothers. I think one of the problems is that grandmother roles have shifted, and yet grandmothers are still crucially important. But grandmothers, my generation, sometimes has ideas and values and goals that differ from the parents' ideas and values and goals, and they don't even know it. They haven't even thought about it. One little example is with food. Food is, everybody has this important idea that you have to feed the children well, but grandmothers knew how to feed their children, but many new things have happened. And one of them is pesticides, organic food, and many changes, so that parents sometimes are worried that the grandmothers are feeding the children wrong. And the grandmothers are thinking, wait a minute, I fed you. You should do better. This is what you ate. Come on. You ate this, macaroni and cheese or whatever. Bologna. I remember giving my kids a lot of bologna. I thought, oh, good, protein meat. My grandchildren would never have bologna. And now you have to say, let's think about that. There are real differences that people are not aware of. And let me do another example right now? Yes. It is fascinating to me how breastfeeding has changed. My grandmother, the mother of those 12 children, breastfed every baby at home, of course. She was a German immigrant. She knew, she had birthed them at home and fed them at home, and that was, of course, what you did. My mother did not breastfeed me because she wanted the best for me, and she thought the best was what was then currently done, which was formula. So I believe I was overfed as a baby, but I never said that to her. She used to tell a story about my father. He wanted to obviously be a good father to this little baby and help his wife with this baby, and so he wanted to do the 2 a.m. feeding one night. Now, in those days, you fed babies on schedule every 4 hours. So 2 a.m. you had to wake up and give the baby a bottle. That was what you did. And he wanted her to sleep, so he volunteered to do the 2 a.m. feeding.
This is your dad?
My dad.
Mr. Harold Stassen?
Mr. Harold Stassen.
Wow.
He was also a very good
nurturing man.
Wow. So that was
Liberal Republican. Okay.
That was what he did. What he agreed to do. But then she woke up in the next morning and saw in the refrigerator the bottle with full bottle. And she said, Harold, you didn't feed her. What's wrong? I mean, she was upset that I was not fed. He said, he got up and he looked at me and he looked at the bottle and I was sound asleep. And he said, he decided that I was, quote, fat enough already, which of course was true. I mean, I obviously, I did not need that bottle, and he was doing, he was feeding on demand, and I was not demanding any food. I was demanding sleep. So, of course, he went back to sleep. And now she tells that story to sort of say, his intentions were good, but he was wrong. But when I hear that story, I think he was right. He was right. So anyway, I was bottle fed. And then when I had my children, it was innovative to breastfeed your children. You had to fight to do it, but I did breastfeed my children. But my mother was a little bit horrified, but I was going to be a good liberated woman, but I stopped. In every case, they were no longer breastfed after about 4 months. Each one a different story, and I, with Bethany, my oldest, I also gave her formula occasionally and gave her cereal and lots of stuff by the time she was 2 months. My daughters, next generation, they do what you're supposed to do these days. They are exclusively breastfeed their children for the first 6 months. Exclusive means no cereal, no formula, no juice, no water. I mean, no applesauce, no bananas, nothing that I used to give them when they were babies. And, that is the current best practices. And I believe in it. I'm, as a developmental psychologist, I think that is great. But when I watch my children, I realize things have changed dramatically. And I have heard stories of grandmothers sneaking a bottle of formula to their babies, their grandchildren, despite the mothers saying, no, because the grandmothers are, like in the old days, of course, baby's crying, you give them a bottle. Come on, what's wrong with you, mother? So it's so I do think one of the things that people need to realize is some things do change. What is important changes, and you have to figure out the basic value. The basic value is make sure the children get fed. So we, as you know, we have an obesity epidemic right now because grandmothers are feeding children who are fat enough already.
Wow, so there you got it, folks. A rare and lengthy oration on breastfeeding versus bottle feeding from a political leader and a psychological leader, the kind you rarely hear on media, okay? Your brother Glenn was active with a group called the NSP, the Network of Spiritual Progressives, co-founded by Michael Lerner and Cornel West, which I've been active with as well. And this group talks a lot about a caring society, trying to create a caring society. And I think a caring society would value the kind of maternal energy and ideas that mothers bring, that you bring, Keen. Now, just briefly, 2 grandmother stories real quick. On my father's side, my grandmother brought to America by a famous actress at the age of 7. She was abandoned in London in an orphanage, and she was basically rescued by a famous actress who brought her to America, an actress who starred in Tolstoy adaptations and things like that, very serious drama. But my grandmother, who never went into theater, nurtured me would sing to me, would tell me stories in the kitchen over a cup of tea, created space for me to be myself, to tell stories, to dream. She also had a back porch, my grandmother, that was her art gallery, where any of the grandkids could put their, colorings and drawings up immediately. It wouldn't have to be vetted or anything. It would go right up on the wall. That was like her museum there. And then on my mother's side, my darling 94-year-old grandma, who we saw yesterday, continues to nurture me by telling stories of the past, about the family, keeping that going. She saved one of my first short stories that I wrote when I was 10 years old, and she gave it to me a couple of years ago. I treasure that, And I've been talking about some of these things in my own psychoanalysis, because I believe in psychoanalysis. I think it's important. I think this is not talked about in public at all. I think Donald Trump needs a good analyst, if you ask me, because he needs to calm down a little bit. And so what do you think is the place of psychoanalysis, coming from a background in psychology? I know that, a lot of talk about drugs now and pharmaceutical companies are getting rich, but just simple dialogue and learning and trusting each other and going deep with language. Freud came up with this idea of the talking cure. I'm a big advocate of psychoanalysis, and I wanted to get your take on that.
Well, I'm not a big advocate of psychoanalysis, I'm sorry to say.
Psychotherapy instead.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
It's a different term. Okay. Therapy.
I mean, Freud's idea was too emphasizing the mother, and the mother as being the problem, not the solution, to all the problems we have today. I am a big fan, however, of psychotherapy.
Okay, yeah. That's what I meant. I know there's a kind of a technical difference between it. But when I say psychoanalysis, I mean psychotherapy. Okay. I think there's actually a new movement. I was at the Left Forum a couple of years ago in New York City, and there was a dialogue on Marxism and psychoanalysis. And I raised my hand during the Q&A, and I said, is there a difference between psychotherapy and psychoanalysis? And one of the panel members said, in my mind, no. So there is a kind of a acceptance that they kind of mean the same thing, and that's where I'm coming from.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Freudian, let's go back, and the Oedipal complex. I'm against that too. So. Yeah.
Okay. Psychotherapy is one of those umbrella words. It just means having a chance to talk to somebody who has some experience in knowing about the psyche, and that I think is valuable. Psychotherapy has many types. Psychoanalysis is one type. Cognitive behavioral therapy is another type, and that is the one that seems most effective today. And there are other types. There are many, many types of psychotherapy. So when that person said there wasn't a difference, he was wrong. She was wrong, but sometimes it's hard to realize that there's this umbrella term of psychotherapy, and then under it is psychoanalysis. Back to my grandmother idea. I mean, I think we've gotten past just analyzing the individual, which is what Freud mostly did, and we've gotten more into family therapy, which is a good thing, or couples therapy, which sometimes is a good thing, because people need to understand what other people are thinking. But we haven't really looked at, and we should look at, grandchild therapy. I mean, that somehow for those two generations, especially the two older generations, to understand why the other one is acting the way they're acting would be very useful. And sometimes you do need a mediator to say, this is, here is the problem. What are you going to do about it? So I am a big believer in that. I'm hoping that my book will help people see that there are things to look at in this process. Because sometimes there are two mistakes people make. One mistake is sometimes, and it's tragic, sometimes there is absolutely no contact between the grandmothers and the grandchildren. Because the middle generation are the gatekeepers, and they say, no, you can't, which is so wrong for many reasons. And the other problem is sometimes the grandmothers are given the children, the state decides that the middle generation is unfit or abusive or they're dead or they're in prison. So the grandmothers raise the children, which is maybe the best solution of a very bad situation, but it is not good for the grandmothers. Those grandmothers are more often depressed. They're more often sick. They're really poor. They have a hard time raising those kids. It's not a good solution. It may be the only solution that's possible given a bad situation. But again, it's breaking up the generational pattern that should be grandmothers as a resource to the middle generation and the grandchildren, like your grandmothers were. I mean, they weren't in charge, but they certainly helped. That's what grandmothers should do.
Let's see now. We want to see how much time we have left, Claudia, as always. Oh, we have plenty of time. Good. 20 minutes left we have. I want to get into definitely the spiritual part because, Judson Church is important to you, your spirituality and the politics, and that it all sort of blends together. But I want to share another story that's significant to me with you, which was when I brought Stanley Aronowitz to give a talk at the VID back in 2009. I had advocated for 2 years. It was a little controversial because Stanley he's a brilliant guy, but he comes kind of on the far left, and there was some resistance in the club to having him come in and give a talk. I had some people who were sort of on my side. Deborah Glick was in favor of it, and you were sort of like on the fence, but then I called you at home one day. I remember, I never forget this conversation, and in a very strange way, this is going to sound totally bizarre, I have to thank Donald Trump, because I had just read his book, How to Think Like a Billionaire. And wait a minute, I'm not a billionaire, by the way, but I read the book, and he says, emails are for wimps, he says. If you want someone to really, if you want to communicate something to somebody, if you want someone to see your point of view on something, pick up the phone and let them hear the passion in your voice. And that's what I did. I picked up the phone and I called you and I said, Keen, I really want to, this guy Aronowitz, he's wonderful, he's brilliant, he was one time a roommate with Ed Koch, and he has a lot to say. I think he'd be a wonderful guest. And you said, John, you said, I think I'm going to rethink that. I think, and then you helped to bring him in. He gave a wonderful talk. People loved it. So this idea of being flexible, that you are open to change your mind in a time when people are coming at each other from these fixed positions, and I believe this, I believe that. Nobody wants to change. At least one good thing about Trump, he says he's been changing his mind. He says he used to be this, now he's that, But how can we evolve in terms of our politics? And you talk about psychotherapy. I think the American politics needs psychotherapy. I think we live in a crazy society. Erich Fromm wrote a book in 1955 called The Sane Society, and I've been reading that. I've been going back to Erich Fromm and his critique of capitalism, that it actually makes people nuts, and all this alienation and atomization. We don't have time to feel human. You have created this kind of humane space around yourself here in the village, in Greenwich Village. And Greenwich Village almost seems like this mythical place, or the village of yore, where you walk around and you meet people and talk in cafes, that bohemian culture, the radical activism that was always here. Do you think now with the development of the village, the gentrification, that's sort of fading out? Are you trying to preserve the village for what it was? You say something about you don't like the fact that there's too many elites now, that the village has become elite.
Right. I do. It's interesting when you mentioned Donald Trump and you mentioned flexibility of mind. One of the things, I know that as a mother of children, you have to be flexible. You cannot, especially when they're teenagers, you can't. Rigidity does not work. You have to really listen to them and try to figure out what's going on. And families don't function very well if somebody is just calling the shots and saying that's how it is. You know this too. Authoritarian parents have children who leave as soon as they can. They go off. I mean, they so it's not a good situation. It's not. You need to have dialogue in the family for children to end up well, I believe. I worry that privilege, white privilege and money privilege, particularly, closes people off to the need to listen to other people. And I worry about that not just ideologically, but there's research on that. That if I do some research on bullies. If you can, it's a human tendency. If you can have your way without other people disagreeing, the tendency is just to do what you want. It's really, you can understand it. So bullies who are not confronted stay bullies. And unfortunately, rich people who can hire other people and get other people to do what they want don't listen very well to other people. They don't have to. It's just not part of them. And I do think, I think it helps. It helps that my grandmother was an immigrant. It helps that she had, her 12 children, and she's the one who lived with us. And she lived with us during World War II, when my father was away and housing was short. But I was a baby for my first 3 years of life. She lived with us, as did two of my mother's sisters. And thinking about that, he was already a famous man, but my dad, right. And he already, but it was pretty clear that we were not, partly because of my grandmother and my aunts and my mother too, but we did not live very high on the hog. We were pretty careful with stuff. One of my aunts who lived with us, I clearly remember when the sheets that we were sleeping in got really worn in the middle because they were so old, she would cut them in half and flip them, sew them, so that the edges of the sheet were now in the middle and the old middle was on the side, so those sheets would last longer. And there were many other, saving things. I think that helps. I think it helps to understand other people. So the village right now has become, people are too privileged, I think. They don't see, I'm glad I teach at Bronx Community College. I see my students and a
very diverse student population.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Yeah.
They don't have a lot of money. They have a lot of hope, and they need to learn a lot. And I really feel that I work hard to try to teach them a lot. But it's hard not to sympathize, I see their lives. I see what they have gone through, and that helps keep me honest, keeps me humble. So, the West Village has become a very rich place. This apartment makes me feel I don't deserve it. I share it with people, as you know. So that helps me feel better. But it's still like, how did this happen? I don't know. So I am actually elite in many ways, privileged in many ways, but I hope I haven't forgotten that this is, that I'm one of the people, not it's not because of me that I've gotten to this nice position. Well,
I think you deserve all the good things that you have, and I think being around you, Keen, now for about maybe 12 years or so, I feel like I have gotten an education, like a PhD in political science, just by being around you at the Village Independent Democrats and watching all your talks over the years, the way you sit there patiently knitting during the meetings as well. And if we're lucky, you bring your homemade cookies, which are the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. Got to put in a plug for the cookies. And also, I mean, you've actually opened up your home to debate watching parties during the presidential elections, and you make your cookies and have other treats and wine, and people sit here, watch the debate, and they're able to then have a dialogue. You always make sure that at some point the TV goes off and we turn the chairs and look at each other and have a conversation. So you're bringing in a pedagogical consciousness as an educator. And I know one of your great interests is in education in the Village. You're advocating for a school on Morton Street. That's one of your claims to fame in the neighborhood. You know, you're pushing for that. So you bring in all these different streams. You know, the psychological, the political, the caring, the nurturing, the intellectual also, but in a very, very caring way. And you know, I think you have such valuable things to share. I would wish that more people would get to know your thoughts, and you know, I hope that a lot of people get to see this. And you know, how can we encourage people to stay hopeful and strong in our politics as we go forward, and to create a better world that's more kind, more caring, more loving, more peaceful? We're always like to put in some thoughts about peace and love. You know, John Lennon lived in this neighborhood in the Village with Yoko Ono. You know, he sang songs like Imagine and Give Peace a Chance. Imagine is a song that they play very often at Judson Church, you know. And so, you know, what do you think, what would some, you know, we only have about 7 minutes left, but what are some hopeful thoughts for people from your own thoughts and your own work, you know, in psychology and in politics, to stay hopeful?
Okay, I think, you know, and again, you are too complimentary of me, but I do believe that it's very important to listen to other people and to try to understand where they're coming from. And that is certainly true for families. I mean, it is very a theme of my grandmother book. Listen to the other generations. Listen, try to figure them out. Another theme is to understand people of different cultures. Again, as a developmental psychologist, it is amazing some of the things that people believe are best for children. I have one other example, which really makes you realize that how little we know. There is a group in Eastern Africa where all the mothers, and this is actually not only this place, but this is the classic example, spend a lot of time on the physical development of their new babies. They massage them, they exercise them. You know, they move their little legs back and forth as they diaper them. I mean, it's just, and you can see this in this culture sometimes, especially in immigrant people. There's a lot of physical moving of the kid and involvement of the kid. And they also, you know, classically, as now is more common for us, they wear their babies a lot. They're in their front carriers and their back carriers, and they have side carriers, and this has been true for decades. And meanwhile, you know, when I was young, babies were in playpens and in cribs and in carriages that were quite distant from the mothers. The people who were pushing the carriages, a very different way to deal with the baby. So in those cultures, they're very physical, very close, very proximal. And they also give the babies walking practice. They help them, they stand up and they bounce them on their laps and they hold them as they walk along, and they say that they are teaching them how to walk. And then they're all very happy because of about age 10 months, 12 months, 14 months, the child in fact walks. And that, good mother has done a good job. She has got a walking baby now. And so some Western psychologists noticed this and said to the mothers, what would happen if you never tried to teach the baby to walk? And the mother's first reaction was just shocked. Imagine not doing all this physical stuff. I mean, what kind of neglect would that be? But then the mother said, well, I guess the babies would never learn to walk. Now, this culture, we don't do physical stuff. We don't exercise our babies. We don't, we're much more distant from our babies. We certainly don't teach them to walk. We sort of encourage them not to walk. But we talk to them a lot. Those cultures, they don't talk to them hardly at all. Westerners believe that if you don't talk to your baby is going to be language slow all his life. What have you done? Terrible.
We got 2 minutes left.
Okay, and so the point is, I actually talk to my babies much more than I exercise them. I believe that, I'm not immune to that. But it is certainly true that there are many different ways to interact with other people. And you have to understand that not everybody does it the way you do it. So in terms of helping people to understand other people, I think it starts by realizing not everybody thinks the same way. Sorry.
Well, that's okay. No, it's wonderful to get these orations from you, Keen. It's such a great pleasure and honor to be with you this hour. Daughter of Harold Stassen, great American statesman and candidate for president 13 times, who was a liberal Republican. I want to say probably today, maybe the one candidate I could think of, well, two candidates getting the most attention, Trump on the right, Bernie Sanders on the left. His politics would seem to be more in sync with your dad, than the Republicans of today. Eisenhower had a top tax rate of 91%. Bernie is looking at the income inequality issue. But anyway, again, thank you, Keen, for being with us. I hope this is the beginning of a dialogue that you could come back on our show, either by yourself or with other people. I think your wisdom is so essential, and your knowledge, and you've been nurturing me all these years, and it's, I'm just so happy both Claudia and I got to spend this hour with you, and our audience will get to see this and continue to grow and learn and develop over a lifetime with developmental psychologist Keen Berger and activist and expert on grandmothers. Thank you so much.
And thank you very much for this chance, too. And certainly if there are grandmothers out there who want me to listen to them, I would love to hear more. I'm certainly not closed-minded on what a grandmother should be. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.